So what I want to show you here is how to set up the new Azure File Sync service. Now what I've done is I've logged into my Azure portal here. So again, what I've already done is I have gone in here and created two machines. So I've created two virtual machines, server 1 and server 2. So the machine that I'm on here, this machine here in lovely purple, that is server 1, and I've RDP'd into server 2, which is in the bright yellow, so we can easily see what the differences are between the two boxes. Now what I've also done here is I've put those servers into a resource group. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my sync service and all of that stuff in there. Now before we create our sync service, we're going to need a cloud location in Azure to sync those files to, and we do that by creating a storage account. So let's go in and let's create a new storage account here. So we're going to go in and select to create a new storage account. So we're going to have to give it a unique name. So we're going to call this, let's call this sync location, some random numbers, and it's going to be resource manager. General purpose is correct. We'll just leave it as standard. We're going to make it locally redundant. All right, we set our subscription and we're going to add it to an existing resource group just to make it easier to manage. And in this case, this is going to be all located in Southeast Asia. All right, so that's good. So let's go and create that. That's going to go out and create us a storage account. That shouldn't take too long to complete. Now, when that storage account has been created, what we'll do is we'll actually go into it and we will go in and create an Azure SMB file share and create a file share inside that. And this is going to be the cloud location into which our files from our servers are going to sync to. Okay, so they're going to sync to that and then sync to each other. All right, so our deployment is successful, so let's go and refresh this page here. We'll see that we have our new sync location here, so let's go into that. And what we need to do is we need to go in here and create some SMB3 file share. So let's go in here and create one here. Let's just call this server share, and let's just give it a quota, let's say 100 gigs. So we save that. And we're not going to create anything inside that. We've just got to have that as a location into which our information will be synced from our servers. Now, once we've done that, what we now need to do is go in and create our sync service. So the way we do that, we go up to new and we go to the marketplace. And if you again just type in sync here, you'll see that one of the options is the Azure File Sync. So we select that from the marketplace. All right, so you'll see that this service currently is in preview. So we're going to create that. And we just need to give it a name. So we're going to call this sync test for us, and change the spelling so we do get it right. All right, so make that sync test. Again, we're going to stick it in the same resource group, and it's going to be in Southeast Asia. So we'll go create there. That'll take a moment to basically deploy that for us. Now, once we've done that, what we then need to do is we'll need to go out and basically put an agent on each server. Now, what we'll need to do is that we'll have to put an exe, but there are some prerequisites before we do that. But let's go in here and have a look. So let's go to our resource group. So click on that, and what we'll see here is we have our server and our server disks in here, but you'll notice down the bottom here we have something called sync test. Now if we go to that, you'll see this is now the new storage sync service in preview. So what we'll need to do is go out and create a sync group. But before that, what we need to do is we need to go in and register a server. So this is the server that is going to sync files up to Azure. Now to do that, we're going to have to basically install the Azure Storage Sync Agent. All right, so if we select that, that will then launch a download. That will download our file for us. So we'll let that download for us. But before we do that, there are some prerequisites we're going to need to complete here basically on the server first. So let's go in and just make sure that this has downloaded for us. No, not as yet. So let's go and click the download button and make sure that that downloads. So now we need to select the server that we're on. In this case, we're on 2016. And you'll see at this stage, the only servers that currently are supported are 2016 and 2012 R2. So let's go next, get that file downloading for us. All right, so there's the agent there. Now, we do have some prerequisites, as I mentioned. So those prerequisites are, firstly, let's go into the server manager first. So let's go into the server manager. All right, and what we need to do is go into local server, and then what we need to do is make sure that our IE enhanced security configuration here is set to off. So we've set that beforehand, so that's good. Now the other thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we have the latest PowerShell modules for Azure installed. So the way that we do that is we simply, on a 2016 server, we just need to basically invoke PowerShell, and then what we're going to do is then basically install the appropriate module. So in this case, I'm going to run the ISE. Now it's important that we run it as an administrator because we're going to need to make some changes to the PowerShell environment. We're going to actually install some commandlets. So what we need to do is basically run it as an admin, let that power up, and then what I'm going to do is when that settles down, we're just going to run a very simple Azure command, and that's going to update our modules. So we can make the writing bigger by just hitting Control and the plus symbol, and then basically what we need to do is we'll be running a command in here called install-module space Azure RM. So that's going to install the required Azure PowerShell modules. All right, so again, we hit enter on that. That will then automatically launch that. Now, that is happening because we have PowerShell version 5 on our 2016 server. If you don't have it, you'll have to install the modules manually or upgrade the PowerShell version to version 5, so support that. So this will kick off. What we'll need to do is accept a couple of security questions. So here we'll see, firstly, we need to accept the NuGet. We just go yes. Once that has completed install, we'll come back and then say, look, I need to install the Azure modules, and I need to select yes to that as well. And that will take a couple of minutes to complete. And then that will mean that we have all the modules up to date, and we can then go in and install the agent. So here's the install for our Azure commandlet. So we go yes to all. And that will then commence pulling that down from the repository, installing those, and putting those on our machines ready to go for the agent for our sync service to take advantage of. So what I'm going to do is that will take a minute or two, as I said, for those Azure modules to be pulled down and installed. So I'm just going to pause the video, let that whole process complete, and then when that's done, I'll just come back and we'll continue on from there. Right, so our modules are all now installed. We can close our PowerShell, go back to our console here, and what we need to do now is to run that sync agent that we downloaded. So we just click on to run that. Let's run that and close that in the background. And you'll see that this will bounce you through a wizard to set up that process. So we'll just follows through. Next, we'll have to accept the terms and go next. And again, not recommended that you change the install location for the time being. So let's go next, use Microsoft Update, go next, and again, allow them to collect data and do an install. Now, this process will run. It will take a minute or two to complete, install the files that it needs to, and then it's going to basically run through the registration process to get this server registered into the Azure portal so that it knows about this server and synchronizing files from this to the Azure file share. So again, this is putting the agent on, and then once we've got the agent installed, we'll then need to go through a registration process. You'll notice here that it's installing a number of required Windows features for this server. So again, what we'll do is just pause this video, let that process complete, and we'll come back and continue on. Okay, so our agent's installation process is now complete. We go finish, and what it'll do now is it'll pop up the server registration. So we need to sign in here. Now, when we sign in here, we'll need to sign in with our Azure credentials. All right, so this is logging in effectively to the Azure portal. So in this case, I'm going to take my demo login here and put that into the system, and then also put in the appropriate password, and that will then connect up to my Azure subscription and continue the registration process. Now, what it's going to prompt me here is for an Azure subscription, because again, I can have multiple Azure subscriptions in a tenant, so I've only got one. Select that, and which resource group. Again, we're targeting a resource group for the sync. That's where we installed the service into, and the storage sync service here, all right, is this sync test, which is the one that we just created. So I now register that, and in this case, because it's a preview, it's just going to ask me to log in. So I need to put in the right credentials there and then the right password. Okay. And what we should see is that in a moment or two, we should see that we have registered this server. So remember that this server here, the one in purple, is server 1. So this is going to be our source server. The other one, server 2, is going to be our potential destination. But in the middle is going to be our Azure file share, the SMB file share that we're going to use. So all good. We've got registration as successful. All right, so we've gone okay here. So let's go back to our portal, and if we now refresh this, we should see that we have indeed a server that is registered. So what we can do now is go out and create a sync group. So what we need to do is synchronize files locally up into Azure. So what we need to do here is go and create a sync group. So we select plus there. We're going to just give this a name. So I'm just going to call it SG. We're going to leave it on that same subscription. Now we need to select that storage account we created into which we are going to sync files that has our SMB file share in there, right? So what we need to do in here is you'll see that when I pull that down, this is the SMB file share that I created in that storage account. So that's good. I go okay. Take a moment or two to create that sync group. All right, so we'll just need to, again, let that process complete. Shouldn't take too long to do that. But once again, what I'll do is I'll just pause the video and let that creation process complete. Okay, so our endpoint is created there. That's great. So we can close that. If we now go into the sync group, we'll see that we have a cloud endpoint. So this is where it's going to sync to in the cloud. That is provision, and it's going to the SMB share that we have called server share. Now we need to go in and create a server endpoint. So this will be on our server machine. Okay, now the way that we do that is we go up here and select the add server endpoint. So I'll look at our registered servers. We've only got one called server 1, and we need to specify the data path here. So what I've got on this server is you'll see that I have a directory here called data 1. Now in data 1, I have a number of files. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as my data location. All right, so we go in here and we go Control V. So that is now the path. I go create, and now it's going to go out and create the server endpoint, right? And you'll see that it goes in here and nominates it as provisioning. Now it's going to take a moment or two to go up and provision that, and it'll come back and give us a status when that is complete. And again, that might take a moment or two, and again, depends on the size of the data and the amount of information that you are syncing. So until that process completes, just let me pause the video once again. Okay, so our server endpoint has been created successfully, as you can see. So that's good news. So let's go in and just clear that alert. You'll see that we have our server endpoint and the health is green. So what that means is we're now synchronizing basically from our server up to our cloud, from our server endpoint to our cloud endpoint here, right? So again, because we've got a small amount of data, we can go in now and hopefully that information sync. Now, the first place we can check that is if we go to our storage account, and let's go into the one that we just created here. All right, and we'll see that we have our SMB file shares. All right, so here's our server share here. If we click this, bingo, there are all the files that are exactly the same as the ones in our data directory that are on our local drive. So let's see if we can tee that up to make it a bit easier to view. All right, so we have all our files here which match the ones that we have on the server here. So again, the idea here is it's now synchronizing from this server, this data 1 directory, up into our Azure SMB storage account, thanks to the SMB file share. Now, what we want to do is we've now got basically the two endpoints. So let's go back and look at our sync location here. So let's go back into the sync service here and look at our sync group. Okay, so again, we have a cloud endpoint and a single server endpoint that is synchronizing. Now, what I want to do is create a second server which is independent and sync to that as well. Now, that server is going to be this server 2 over here. Now, we're going to go through this the long way. So what we need to do is we need to go into Server Manager on this new server. We'll need to go to Local Server, and as I said, we'll need to set the IE Enhanced Security configuration to off. So let's just set that to off. Okay, and then we basically update that, so that's good. Now we can save that. The next thing we need to do is to make sure that those PowerShell modules are installed. All right, so again, what we can do is if we go in here, we'll go this way through the folders. Remember that you want to run this basically as an administrator because it's going to do some installation. So let's go in here and run this as the administrator. This will bring up our ISE environment. And then the command that we want to run is install-module space Azure RM to put the Azure modules on there. We'll have to accept a couple of prompts to allow that to install. And then once that's complete, we can then go and install the agent. All right, so what I'm going to do here is just kick that process off. So let's get that happening. All right. And then while that's running, I will just pause the video, let that process complete, and then come back and continue on with the installation of the agent on this second server. So my PowerShell installation is now complete, so I can close that. I've copied the agent files over here, so I can just run those on this server number 2. It's going to step me through basically exactly the same process, and once it's installed, the agent is going to run through the registration process. So again, what I'll do is I'll run this, get it started, and then I'll pause the video, and we'll come back to the point where it's asking to do the registrations for this second server. So my agent installation is now complete. I'll finish that, and then what it should do is it should now run the registration of this second server. So I need to once again sign in to my Azure account and then basically follow the bouncing ball again, and I need to put it in obviously the same resource group, same locations here. So again, I just put in my demo account here and make sure that I put in the correct password for that account. All right, and then that will basically connect me to Azure, and then it'll pop me up and say, okay, we need to register this. So again, same subscription. All right, so we then go in and it'll identify that. What's the resource group? Okay, so I need to confirm that, and then same SMB share. So I need to register this. This will now register with my sync service. Again, at this case, in this stage, I just have to log in again. All right, and that's the current state of affairs with the preview version. So let that complete. I should get a confirmation shortly that that process has been completed successfully. I'll go back into my Azure console. I'll look, and I should see now that I have 2 registered servers. Server 1, which is the one that is synchronizing up to the SMB share, and now server 2. All right, so this is now server 2 successfully registered. So let me go back into the portal here. Let me go back to this, and let's go in and have a look at registered servers, and bingo, we see that we have 2. So we have our original server 1, and now we have our second one, which we've just registered. So let's go to our sync group. All right, and let's go in here, and we want to add now an additional endpoint. So our server endpoint currently is server 1, so we're going to want to add a second endpoint, but where do we want to put that data? So what we need to do here is let's go to the local drive of the computer on server 2. Let's go in here and go into our C drive, and you'll see that there's nothing in there. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a directory here called data2. Okay, so this is where I'm going to want to synchronize the information. Okay, so data2 currently has nothing in it, so I'm just going to copy that path, make sure that I get right, go back to my console, and I'm going to add another server endpoint here. All right, so in this case, I pull this down, I've got 2 registered servers, so now I want to put it on the second server. This is the data path we're going to synchronize into. So data2, it verifies that. I go create, and we should see that is creating that endpoint. We'll see that it comes up as provisioning, but let's just pop over to that server, give it a minute to provision, and then what we should see is we should see again these files from our server 1 location, right? So these are the files here. That is in our server 1. You'll see this is in data 1, and this is again on our second server. So once that provisioning process has completed successfully in the back end, we should see those files. There they are. So it didn't take very long at all. So you'll see that we get exactly the same files in this server 2 now as we have in server 1, 2 different directories, data 1 and data 2. Now remember that not only are we synchronizing between these two endpoints, we're also synchronizing up here to our SMB share. Now, what we can do with Azure SMB shares, which we've always been able to do, is let's go into that location and let's have a look at our SMB file shares. Let's go into the share. There are all the files. But what we can do now is we can connect to this using basically a command prompt, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect from Windows, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect from a third location, or a fourth location, I suppose. So this is my Windows 10 box. So if I have a look at this, right, so this is my Windows 10 box. So you'll see that it is different. If I do a ver, you'll see that it is Windows 10. So what I'm going to do is basically paste that command in that I got from the Azure portal. So again, this is on a completely different machine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to go in here and map it to the next available drive, which will be star. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, that should then map to the first available drive that I have. So it's done that. So if we now go into our Z drive and do a dir, you should see there are all the files. So those files again match exactly the ones that we have in server 1, server 2, and also the Azure SMB file share. So the way we went and set all this up was we basically created a resource group, and then what we did is we went in and added the sync, the Azure File Sync from the marketplace. So we created that, added that into our resource group, and then basically what we did is we went in and configured that. So then we went in to that new sync service and we registered our servers, okay, and then we created a sync group. All right, and that sync group then targeted those servers and the data locations. Now, once we'd done that, that information was then synchronized between the servers and also the cloud endpoint. And of course, to do this, we needed a cloud endpoint. The cloud endpoint was basically an Azure SMB file share, and we did that by adding that into the Azure storage account here. So it's really simple, really easy to get this whole Azure File Sync service up and running. Remember that it is in preview at this point in time. It will improve and enhance over time, but hopefully this should get you started and get you in a position where you can start playing and evaluating this for your needs.